I don't even know where to begin. I've done a lot of RV camping across the U.S., from the forests in Oregon to the deserts of Arizona, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened to me in the Navajo Nation in Utah. It's the kind of experience that changes how you see the world, how you sleep at night. To this day, I don't even talk about it much. But if you're into RV life or ever thinking of heading out there, hear me out. I'm not making any of this up. This was around late September. I remember because the nights were starting to get cold, but the days were still warm. I had been traveling through Monument Valley, which, if you've ever seen it, is just breathtaking. I wanted to find a quiet place to park my RV and stay for a couple of nights. Somewhere remote where I could unwind, cook outside, maybe stargaze, take some drone shots, all that. I ended up on Navajo land, not far from Mexican Hat, Utah. I had checked online beforehand and found this little clearing that RVers had mentioned on a couple of forums. Not an official campground, but one of those boondocking spots. The GPS coordinates were good, and when I got there, I saw one fire ring made of stones and tire marks from previous campers, so I figured it was all right. There were no other people around, just red rock, endless sky, and silence. That first evening was quiet. Too quiet. I don't even know how to explain it. You know how, when you're in nature, you still hear something. Crickets, wind in the trees, birds, distant coyotes. Not here. Once the sun went down, it was just dead silence. I cooked some food outside, beans and rice, and sat on my folding chair watching the sky change colors. Then the stars came out, and man, you've never seen stars until you've seen them in the desert. But something felt off. The air felt heavier. The shadows looked sharper. I heard something like footsteps, not animal footsteps, human, but slow, deliberate, crunching the gravel behind my RV. I stood up, flashlight in hand, and scanned around the vehicle. Nothing. But I swear to you, I had that feeling, that primal feeling, like I was being watched. Not by an animal, by someone. I ended up going inside early and locking everything up tight. I even pulled the shades down, which I rarely do when I camp alone. The next day, I woke up early. Around 6 a.m., there were footprints outside. I had walked in a circular pattern the evening before, and now I noticed a different set of prints, barefoot. Human and small, like a kid's, except there hadn't been anyone around. I debated leaving then and there, but something told me to stay one more night. Curiosity, maybe, or stupidity. Around noon, I saw a figure walking in the distance, an old man, thin, weathered, long gray hair. He didn't look homeless or threatening, more like someone who had lived in this land his whole life. He stopped, maybe 50 feet from my RV, and just stared. I waved. He didn't wave back. Then he said something in a language I didn't understand. I assume it was Navajo. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't friendly either. It was warning-like. Then he turned around and walked off into the rocks like he'd melted into them. Later that day, I drove a few miles to get some cell service and called a friend who's from New Mexico and part Navajo. I told him what happened and he got real quiet. Then he asked, "Did he tell you not to stay after sundown?" I said I wasn't sure. He said, "You need to go, bro. There are places you don't camp overnight, not alone, especially not near any skinwalker territory." Against my better judgment, I stayed one more night. Maybe part of me wanted to prove nothing was wrong. Maybe I was just tired. I parked the RV the same spot, did my nightly routine, but this time I left the exterior lights on and kept the flashlight by my bed. Around 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to 3 slow knocks on the back of the RV. I froze. It wasn't wind, it wasn't an animal, it was knuckles. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move for almost 10 minutes. I just lay there, holding my breath. Then came the scratching. Not like a dog scratching a door. This was long, drawn out, like nails slowly dragging across the metal. I grabbed my flashlight, aimed it toward the back window. Nothing. Opened the shade an inch. No one there. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something move across the front windshield. It was on all fours, pale, thin, almost human, but not quite. The limbs were too long. The way it moved was wrong. Fast and jerky, like it was skipping frames in real life. I shut the shade and didn't sleep the rest of the night. As soon as the sun started to rise, I was already driving. Didn't pack my stuff properly, didn't care, just left. Once I got into cell range, I called my friend again, told him everything. He said, yeah. You were near Skinwalker Land. Locals don't even go out there at night. I later found out that Navajo Nation has areas that are strictly avoided after dark because of stories that go back generations. Skinwalkers, cursed spirits, shapeshifters. To this day, I don't know exactly what I saw, but I know what I felt. And it wasn't just fear. It was that cold realization that you're not alone. That something ancient and angry still roams certain parts of this land, and it doesn't care about your cell phone or your RV or your curiosity. I'll never camp there again. And if you ever find yourself somewhere in the Navajo Nation, and the night starts to feel just a little too quiet, leave. My name is Michael, and I've been RV traveling across the American Southwest for a couple years now. Nothing fancy, just a converted Sprinter van with enough space to cook, sleep, and plug in a camera or laptop when I need to get work done. The desert's always had a strange pull on me. Something about the isolation, the red rocks, and the silence. It's beautiful, sure, but it can also feel ancient, like something is always watching. Anyway, this happened back in early October 2022. I remember the date because I had just crossed into the southern part of Utah near the Four Corners region. I was headed to Monument Valley, planning to spend 2 nights boondocking, off-grid camping, in a remote part of the Navajo Nation. I'd done my research, checked the weather, had plenty of food and water, and even had offline maps downloaded on my phone. I thought I was prepared. But there are some things you can't prepare for. I pulled off from Highway 163 onto a dirt road that snaked its way through a narrow canyon. There was no service, but I didn't mind. I had already spoken to a local vendor at a gas station in Kayenta, who told me about a flat area where RVers sometimes camp. Just don't go too deep into the mesas, he said. Stick to the old sheep trails. I nodded, thinking he was just being cautious, but his tone had a seriousness to it that stuck with me. I set up camp around 4 p.m. The sun was starting to sink behind the cliffs. The light was golden, bouncing off the red rocks in a way that felt otherworldly. No noise, no wind, just silence. As night fell, I made a small fire, read a bit, and went to bed early. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to a distant sound, like chanting. I thought maybe it was coyotes howling. It echoed strangely through the canyons. But as I listened, it didn't sound like animals at all. It sounded like voices, human, low, repeating something over and over. I froze in bed, barely breathing. Then it stopped, just like that. The next morning, I stepped outside and found something bizarre. Around my van, in the red dirt, were what looked like barefoot footprints, small, wide, and definitely human. They circled the van twice, then vanished into the brush. I stared at them for a long time, trying to rationalize it. Maybe hikers? Maybe someone just wandered through in the night. But I would have heard footsteps. I'm a light sleeper, and these prints were just off. Too symmetrical, too deliberate. like whoever made them was trying to be seen. I shook it off and went for a short hike, but all day I felt watched. I'd stop and turn suddenly, thinking I heard something behind me. Branches would crack, rocks would slide, but no one was ever there. I told myself I was just being paranoid. That night, I didn't light a fire. I stayed inside the van with the windows covered. Around 3 a.m., I heard a tap, just one, on the side of the van, then silence. Then another tap, on the opposite side. Then a whisper, clear as day, right outside my window. "Get out!" I jumped up, turned on all the lights, and grabbed the knife I keep by the bed. I flung open the door, heart pounding, and there was no one there. But the strangest part? In the dirt just outside the van was a single white feather. Not a bird in sight, not a breeze, just that feather lying there, perfectly placed. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. As soon as the sun came up, I packed everything and started the long, bumpy drive back to the highway. When I finally got into cell service range, I drove straight to Bluff, Utah, and found a small Navajo-run cafe. I wasn't planning to say anything, but an older man behind the counter saw how shaken I looked and asked me where I had camped. I hesitated, then told him. His face dropped. "You went into the old place," he said. "That land is sacred. It's where the skinwalkers are said to roam." I'd heard of the term before, something about Navajo legends, dark medicine, shapeshifters. I never really believed it. He leaned in and said, "They come out at night. They test your spirit. They try to lure you out. And if you don't leave..." He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he gave me a pouch of cedar and sage, told me to burn it and say a prayer. I did that very night while parked in a public campsite miles away from the nation. That night I slept without any noises, no tapping, no footprints, no voices. It's been over a year now, and I've never gone back. I still travel, still boondock, but I never camp near tribal lands unless I've gotten permission and know exactly where I'm going. And here's the kicker. About a month after that incident, I looked back at the photos I took that first evening. The ones of the sunset and the cliffs. In one of them, way in the background, there's a figure. It's small, blurry, barefoot, wearing what looks like animal hide, facing directly toward the camera. I didn't see it when I took the photo. I still have it. But I never show it to anyone, because I don't want to invite whatever it was back in, believe me or don't. But I'm telling you, not everything in the desert is meant to be seen. All right. I don't know why I keep going back to this, but I think talking about it helps. Helps me sleep better. Helps me believe it wasn't all in my head. But what happened to me in the Navajo Nation, near a place called Comb Ridge in southern Utah, was real as the dry desert wind, and the fear that still grips me every time I hear a distant drumbeat. This was back in 2021. I was doing this solo RV trip across the Southwest, trying to unplug, reset my mind. Life was heavy. I had just come out of a toxic relationship and needed space. Solitude, silence. I found it, all right, too much of it. I had read about Comb Ridge, this massive natural sandstone ridge that cuts across the land like the spine of something ancient. It's sacred to the Navajo people. I didn't know that at the time, though. I just thought it looked cool in the pictures. I found a small, legal BLM camping spot about a mile off a dirt road. No one else around. Just me, my RV, and miles of stone and silence. The first evening was peaceful. I parked right near the edge of the canyon, watched the sunset from the roof of my RV with a cold beer, took a couple of photos, then went inside and knocked out early. And that's when it started. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to what sounded like drumming. Slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat made of wood and hide. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but I sat up, and it was still going, faint but real, like it was coming from beneath the ground or echoing off the canyon walls. Then, silence. I looked outside. No wind, no lights, no people. I told myself maybe it was something natural. Rocks shifting, distant thunder. Anything to make it make sense. Eventually, I fell back asleep. The next night, it got worse. Around midnight, I was journaling with my little lantern on when I heard it again. But this time, closer. And then, whispers. I swear to you, I heard whispering outside the RV. Not just one voice, several. Low, raspy, overlapping, like 100 people trying to speak in hushed tones at once. I killed the lantern. Total darkness. I sat there, frozen, my back against the kitchenette, holding my breath. The whispering stopped. Then 3 taps on the side of the RV. Not knocking, tapping. I peeked through the corner of the shade. There was a woman, standing maybe 15 feet away, dressed in white, long black hair, barefoot. She wasn't moving, wasn't looking at the RV, just standing there, staring out toward the canyon. I swear I'm not crazy. I saw her. And the strangest part? She wasn't solid. Her body shimmered like heat off pavement. Then she turned her head slowly toward me. That's when I dropped the curtain and grabbed my keys. I didn't even put shoes on. I started the RV and drove half a mile down the dirt road in the pitch dark, heart pounding. I parked in a clearing near a dry riverbed, totally shaken. I should have left. I know I should have left. But I convinced myself I was just tired. That maybe I had imagined the woman. That the drum sounds were just Navajo ceremonial music from miles away. You know how your brain tries to rationalize what it doesn't understand? Anyway, I stayed one more night, and I'll never forgive myself for that decision. I parked in a new spot, far from the canyon edge. This place had a little brush cover and even a couple of animal tracks nearby, made me feel less isolated. That night, I slept with a knife under my pillow. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a strange smell, like sage, but also burning hair. When I opened the RV door to get air, I found something outside. A perfect circle made of black rocks had been placed in front of the RV door. I hadn't heard a sound all night. No footsteps, no movement, just this circle. Inside it was a dead rabbit, neatly placed, like an offering. That was it for me. I didn't care how far I had to drive in the dark. I left. Didn't even grab half my stuff, I just left it. Weeks later, I was in Santa Fe, talking to an older Navajo woman at a trading post. She saw my face when I told her where I'd camped. She didn't flinch, didn't smile. She said, "You camped near where the old ones walk. They don't like being watched. You were lucky. Some people don't come back." Then she handed me a small pouch of cedar and sage, tied with red thread. "Keep this in your vehicle, and don't go back." I've never returned, not even close. I still travel, still RV, but never again in the Navajo Nation. There are old things out there, things older than roads, RVs, and tourists, and they remember. If you ever hear drums in the night, don't open the door. You ever do something you know is a bad idea, but you convince yourself it'll be fine? Because bad things only happen to other people? Yeah, this story is that mistake. And it happened to me in 2022. I was RVing through the Four Corners area. You know, where Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado meet. I had this bucket list goal of parking my RV in all 4 states in 1 week. Utah was my last stop, and I figured I'd finish strong with a couple nights camping on the edge of the Valley of the Gods, just inside Navajo land. Biggest mistake of my life. I still have nightmares about that thing I saw. Before I got deep into Navajo Nation, I stopped at a dusty little gas station in Bluff, Utah. It was barely lit, the kind of place that looks like it hasn't changed since the 1960s. The guy working there had long gray braids and a stare that went through you. As I was paying for snacks, he asked where I was headed. Valley of the Gods. Thought I'd do some RV camping out there for a night or two. He didn't blink, didn't smile. He just said, "Don't face your camper east, and don't look out the windows after midnight, no matter what you hear." I laughed awkwardly and said, "Right." He didn't laugh. "Not a joke," he said. "If you see yellow eyes in the dark, don't engage it." I got back in my RV thinking he was just messing with a tourist. You know, Navajo legend vibes, creepy desert stories. I've always respected local culture, but I didn't take it seriously. Not yet. The spot I found was unreal, the kind of red rock beauty that makes you forget everything else in life. I parked near some hoodoos, set up camp, and watched the sun bleed into the horizon. That night, around 11:45 p.m., I was reading a book by lantern light. No phone, no distractions, just peace. Until I heard gravel crunching behind the RV. I froze. It was slow, deliberate, like someone walking in bare feet on dry stone. I turned off the light, sat still, didn't breathe. Then, something brushed against the side of the RV, not an animal, not a gust of wind. It was a hand. You can feel it when it's a hand, you know? I peeked through the back curtain, just a crack, expecting to see a deer or maybe some hiker playing a prank. Instead, I saw a shadow. Tall, thin, taller than any man. Shoulders too wide. Standing motionless maybe 15 feet from the RV. Then it moved, not walked, not ran, and that's when I saw them. 2 glowing yellow eyes, just hovering in the dark. No pupils, no whites, just burning yellow light. I dropped the curtain, locked the doors, turned off every light, and sat in silence for the rest of the night, holding a kitchen knife I knew wouldn't help. When the sun finally came up, I stepped outside, still shaken. And that's when I saw it. On the red sand outside the RV was a single handprint. But it wasn't human. It had 6 fingers, long, thin, clawed. I packed everything and started the engine. But I hesitated. Something in me, pride, stupidity, made me think maybe it was a dream. Maybe it was exhaustion. I'd driven so far. I told myself I'd sleep one more night, but this time I'd face the camper west. Like the gas station guy said, I should have left. Around 1:17 a.m., I woke up to soft tapping on the window near my head. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't loud, it wasn't random. It was like someone knew I was awake and wanted me to look. Then the whispering started. From outside. Voices, not one, but several, whispering my name. Heke, Heke. Except I never told anyone my name. The whispers got louder, more desperate, until it sounded like someone was crawling around the RV, whispering through the vents. I couldn't move. My body wouldn't respond. I was trapped inside my own panic. Then the knocking turned to banging. 3 rapid knocks on the front door, then silence. Then one last whisper, from right outside the window behind my bed. "Let me in." I don't even remember starting the RV. I just remember the tires kicking up sand and rock as I floored it in reverse, then tore down the road, headlights off, driving by moonlight. I drove all the way to Kayenta before I even breathed again. A week later, I was still shaking. I found a Navajo elder through a local contact. Told him everything. He nodded slowly and said, "There are watchers." they walk the land. When you camp where you're not welcome, they come to see you. If you're lucky, they only watch." Then he said something that still gives me chills. "It followed you, but you moved before it could enter. Never camp alone there again. And if you ever hear your name in the dark, never answer." To this day, I don't look out windows at night when I'm camping. I keep Sage in the RV, and I'll never, ever return to Navajo Nation. Because something ancient is still out there, watching. Another night I wish I could forget. This story still haunts me. I've shared bits of it with friends, but most people either change the subject or nervously laugh like I'm making it up. I promise you, this happened. And the worst part? I didn't believe the warnings. It started in September of 2023. I was 3 months deep into my solo RV road trip, chasing silence, open skies, and peace of mind. Utah had always called to me, especially the Navajo Nation territories. The landscapes felt older than time itself. I should have realized some silence isn't peace, it's a warning. I was in Monument Valley, but the nearby lots were packed with tourists. I asked a young Navajo guy at a gas station if there were any quieter places to park overnight. He hesitated, then mentioned an unmarked dirt road off Highway 163. "You can camp there," he said, "but don't dig anything. Don't walk too far from the RV, and if you hear singing, just ignore it." I asked him what he meant by singing. He didn't answer. I thought he was being cryptic, or maybe pulling my leg, but I was desperate for solitude, so I drove out that way anyway. The road was barely a path. I had to inch my RV between old desert brush and sandstone outcrops. After about 20 minutes, I found a flat clearing surrounded by small ridges. Gorgeous, still, like time had stopped. I parked, made some coffee, and watched the sunset. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to a faint sound. I thought it was the wind at first, but it carried a melody, a woman's voice. Software, wordless, mourning. It was like humming, ancient and sorrowful. No instruments, just one voice, drifting with the desert air. I stepped outside barefoot, goosebumps crawling up my spine. The desert was pitch black. I couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the RV's floodlights. The humming grew slightly louder, not closer, but clearer. I called out, "Hello?" The humming stopped. Dead silence. Then, behind me, a soft whisper. "He hears." I spun around. No one was there. I slammed the RV door and didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I noticed something odd near my tires. A shallow dip in the dirt, like the ground had caved in overnight. Curious and stupid, I grabbed a small trowel and cleared some dust away. Under the surface was a row of stones, neatly arranged in a circle. I brushed more dirt, found a second ring of smaller stones, and in the center, a smooth black rock with red markings. It looked placed, sacred. That's when I heard it again, faint, carried on the wind, humming. But this time, I wasn't scared. I was curious. I reached for the black stone. The moment I touched it, the air shifted. Everything went silent. Even the wind stopped. Then I felt it, a hand under the earth. It grabbed my wrist. I screamed, fell back, and scrambled to my feet. The hole was just there, still. No hand, no movement. But my wrist had a red mark, like fingers had clutched it too hard. I covered the hole back up and sprinted inside the RV. That night, I couldn't sleep. My wrist was burning. The desert outside was quiet until just after midnight. That's when I heard footsteps. Dozens of them, crunching gravel, whispering, sand shifting. I peeked through the front windshield and froze. There were people walking through the desert. Figures in old ceremonial dress. Feathers, robes, barefoot, no faces, just smooth blank skin where eyes and mouths should have been. They were walking in a line around my RV, then the humming began again, louder, stronger. Now it wasn't just one voice, it was a choir. They were singing to me. I shut every curtain and turned off the lights. But then, behind me, inside the RV, I heard a woman whisper, "You dug, now you carry." At sunrise, I bolted. Drove non-stop out of the Navajo Nation. Didn't stop until I reached Flagstaff. I thought I had escaped it. But that was just the beginning, the mark on my wrist. It never faded. Sometimes at 2:30 a.m., I still wake up to that same humming. No matter where I camp, even in cities, even in motels, it's always the same melody. I went back to that gas station months later. The young Navajo guy saw my wrist, and his eyes went wide. "You touched it?" I nodded. He handed me a pouch of ash and cedar, told me to bury it under a full moon and never go back. I did exactly that. The humming hasn't come back since. But sometimes, I still dream of that black stone. And in the dream, I hear her voice again. If you're reading this, never trust your reflection after dark. I used to think the scariest thing about solo RV camping was running out of gas in the middle of nowhere. Or maybe breaking down 50 miles from the nearest town. Nope. The scariest thing is looking into your own reflection and realizing it's not looking back. This happened last summer. I was camping through southern Utah, hitting all the remote places. Places with no signal, no tourists, just you and the wild. One of the spots I stopped at was near Comb Ridge, on the edge of Navajo Nation land. I'd read somewhere that the ridge had spiritual significance. The terrain is twisted and dramatic, ancient. I thought it'd be perfect for a few nights of peace. What I got was a psychological nightmare. My first night there was completely normal, beautiful. Stars like glitter spilled across the sky, coyotes howling in the distance. Nothing out of place. The next morning, I was brushing my teeth in the RV's little mirror above the sink. That's when I noticed something strange. In the reflection, behind me, there was a woman. She wasn't there when I turned around, but in the mirror, clear as day. An old woman wearing traditional Navajo clothes, standing just outside the RV window, staring at me. I whipped around again. Nothing. Looked back at the mirror. Gone. I told myself it was a smudge. A weird angle. Maybe I was tired. I laughed it off. Shouldn't have. That evening, I recorded a short vlog, just talking to the camera. Nothing crazy. When I played it back to check the audio, I nearly dropped my phone. In the background of the video, standing by the RV door, was me, but I wasn't filming anywhere near the door. I was in front of the camera, talking. So, who the hell was that standing behind me? Same shirt, same hair, same expression, but that other version of me never blinked. Just stared straight into the camera. I deleted the video. I wish I'd saved it. I wish I hadn't. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a tapping noise. At first, I thought it was the wind. The desert gets rowdy at night. But this was rhythmic, like someone lightly dragging a finger along the glass. Then I heard it. 3 soft words whispered just outside the RV. "Let me in." I grabbed a flashlight and pointed it at the window. No one was there, but I saw scratches. Dozens of long, thin scratches across the window, like fingernails had been carving at it for hours. Then I noticed something horrifying. They weren't on the outside of the glass, they were on the inside. The next morning, I decided to pack up. But before I left, I caught my reflection again, this time in the RV's side mirror. Except My reflection wasn't matching my movements. I raised my hand. It didn't. I leaned in. It just stood there. Then it smiled. I didn't. I slammed the mirror shut and floored it out of there. About an hour later, I pulled into a small gas station in Mexican Hat. I looked shaken. The older Navajo woman behind the counter noticed. "You saw it, didn't you?" she said quietly. I didn't know how to respond. She came around the counter and handed me a pouch with charcoal, cornmeal, and something else. Smelled like sage. "It follows those who doubt themselves," she said. "The mirror spirit. It looks for cracks in your mind and copies you. If you stare too long, you lose who you are, and it takes your place." "What do I do?" I asked. She said, "Don't look at your reflection for 3 nights. Cover all mirrors. And whatever you do, don't talk to it." Night 2 of driving, I was parked in a safe spot miles away. I got curious, stupid. I uncovered the small mirror in the RV's bathroom. Nothing happened until I walked away and glanced back. The reflection of me was still looking into the mirror, even though I had turned around, and then, slowly. It looked at me over its shoulder, smiling. It's been months. I covered every mirror in the RV. I don't take selfies anymore. I smashed my phone camera, but sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I still catch it watching, waiting. One day, I think it's going to trade places with me, and no one will know. If you ever see a version of me that feels off, don't follow it, don't talk to it, and whatever you do, don't let it smile. I was somewhere deep in southeastern Utah, not far from the Arizona border, inside Navajo Nation territory. I had been RV camping for weeks at that point, mostly bouncing between state parks and remote pull-offs, just enjoying the stillness of the desert. There's a certain kind of quiet out there that you can't find anywhere else. It's not just lack of noise. It's like the land itself is holding its breath. I had planned to stay 2 nights in a secluded area I found using some hiking forums. It was off an old dirt trail about 45 minutes from the nearest paved road. No service, no lights, no nearby campers, just me and the vast stretch of red earth. Perfect. The first day was uneventful. I hiked, took some photos, made a simple dinner, and went to bed early. That night, I woke up at exactly 2:17 a.m. Not to a sound, but to a feeling. Like someone was standing over me. You know that sensation, when your body just knows you're not alone? I sat up slowly and listened. Nothing. No wind, no animals, not even the RV creaking. It was unnaturally silent. I reached for my flashlight but stopped when I heard what sounded like gravel crunching just outside the RV, a single footstep, then another. Then it stopped. I didn't even breathe. I didn't check. I just stayed there, paralyzed, until sleep eventually took me out of fear or exhaustion. By morning, I convinced myself it was an animal, or maybe the RV settling. I shook it off. Later that day, I took a walk out past a small ridge about a half-mile from my camp. I found an old wooden post, looked like a boundary marker, sun-bleached and cracked, with some faded carvings I couldn't make out. Around it were little piles of stones arranged in triangles. I didn't touch anything. I just stood there, staring at it, feeling like I'd wandered somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. On my way back, I noticed my own footprints, and another set beside them. Lighter, smaller, barefoot. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anyone, but I could feel it again, like something was just behind me, always just out of sight. That night, I locked everything. Windows, doors, even the cabinets inside the RV. I don't know why, just nerves. Around 1 a.m., the smell hit me. rot, like wet meat left out in the sun. I got up to check, thinking maybe I left some trash inside. But the smell wasn't coming from the trash can. It was coming from the sink drain. I leaned in, confused, and heard whispering, clear as day. A woman's voice speaking in a language I didn't understand. It wasn't coming from outside. It was from the drain. I turned on the water, slammed the cover down, and stepped back. That's when I heard the knock. 3 slow taps on the side of the RV. Low, deliberate. Then the scratching started. Slow, dragging, like nails across metal. It circled the entire RV once. I didn't move. I just stood there in the dark, heart racing. Every light off, too afraid to even look out the window. The next morning, I found dozens of small handprints on the RV. Not full-size, not child-size either. Something in between, thin, narrow fingers. Some of them were upside down. I packed up immediately. I didn't even eat. I just got behind the wheel and started driving. Didn't care which direction. I just needed to get away from there. About 20 minutes into the drive, I passed a figure standing in the distance, right at the edge of a dried-up creek bed. It was a woman. Long black hair, white dress, no shoes. Just standing there, staring directly at me. As I passed her, she didn't move. But every single hair on my body stood up. I looked into my rearview mirror, and she wasn't there. I haven't been back to that part of Utah since. I still travel, but I stay closer to towns now, to people. That experience changed me. I don't tell it to scare people. I tell it because something is out there, in the desert, watching, waiting. And if you ever smell something rotten in the middle of the night or hear whispering from your sink, don't open the window, don't answer the knock, and whatever you do, don't look back. I've never really talked about this, mostly because I couldn't explain it in a way that didn't make me sound crazy. But I've realized lately, some stories aren't meant to be understood. They're meant to warn. So, if you're out there planning on RV camping in the Navajo Nation in Utah, especially near the old dry riverbeds, listen to this. Last spring, I took a solo trip that started off as a reset. I'd been through some heavy stuff. Relationship ended. I lost someone close to me, and I just needed to get away from the noise. I rented an RV, loaded up my camera gear, and made a plan to go off-grid for a week. My goal was silence, stars, and space. The place I chose was east of Monument Valley, not far from a lesser-known trail that a few hikers online called Sacred and Forgotten. That should have been my first red flag, honestly. The path there wasn't even on Google Maps, just some GPS coordinates someone posted years ago. I got there late afternoon. The land was unreal. Cracked red earth, huge plateaus in the distance, and a small dried-up riverbed just below where I parked. I felt alone in a way I hadn't felt in years. No cell service, no voices, no artificial light, just the wind and the heat. It was perfect. The first night, I made a fire and sat outside listening to the silence. I kept thinking how empty it all felt. Not in a bad way, just untouched. Like even time didn't move the same out there. Somewhere around midnight, I saw lights flickering way out in the distance. Not campfires, not stars. Just faint bluish lights hovering, fading in and out, like someone swinging a lantern back and forth. I watched them for an hour. They didn't get closer, didn't move, just pulsed. I figured maybe some Navajo herders were out late, or maybe some old oil rigs were messing with the atmosphere. I went to bed eventually, though I didn't sleep great. I kept waking up like something was shifting in the RV. The floor creaked more than usual, and the air felt tight, like I was inside a vacuum. At 3:33 a.m., I woke up freezing. The desert gets cold at night, but this was different. I could see my breath inside the RV. I checked all the windows, closed, doors locked, but there were wet footprints on the floor, barefoot, human, leading from the back of the RV to the driver's seat, and then disappearing. I froze. I didn't move until the sun came up. Next morning, I stepped outside and noticed something even worse. Right beside the RV, in the dry, cracked dirt, was a perfect spiral carved into the ground. About 6 feet wide, deep, clean lines, like it had been burned into the earth. But I didn't hear anything all night. No digging, no tools, and it hadn't been there the day before. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was some old ceremonial thing, maybe left behind. But deep down I knew it was fresh. That afternoon I climbed up to one of the ridges overlooking the dried-up river. I brought my drone to capture some aerial footage. After a few minutes of flight, the drone started losing signal. I checked my screen and saw something weird. A cluster of figures standing in the middle of the dry riverbed. At first, I thought they were rocks or trees, but they were arranged in a perfect line, maybe 15 or 20 of them, evenly spaced, like they were waiting for something. And then they looked up, all of them, at the same time, at the drone. I immediately brought it back and reviewed the footage. Nothing. The figures were gone, like the drone had captured something I wasn't supposed to see. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept the lights on, all of them. Around 2 a.m., I heard a soft knocking on the RV door. Not loud, just 3 light taps, then silence. I waited, held my breath, then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. I whispered out, "Who is it?" And a voice answered, my own voice, mimicking me. "Who is it?" My blood turned to ice. I didn't move, didn't speak. I sat in that RV with a knife in one hand and my phone in the other, even though there was no signal. Eventually, the knocking stopped, but I could still hear footsteps circling the RV. Dry, crunching earth. Slow, deliberate. Next morning, I decided to leave. I packed fast, didn't even eat. But as I turned the ignition, I noticed something horrifying. My key wasn't in the ignition. It was hanging on the hook near the door. And yet, the RV had already turned on. I didn't touch a thing. I stepped out, walked over to the key, slowly picked it up, and backed out of the RV. The engine stopped. Dead silent again. Then, from behind me, a voice whispered in Navajo. I don't know the language. I'd never heard it before. But somehow I understood it. It said, "You saw what you shouldn't have. Now you carry it." I turned around. No one was there. I drove for hours that day, didn't stop until I reached a gas station near Kayenta. When I got out, a man outside stared at me. Old, worn face, deep lines around his eyes. He said, "You been near the dry river?" I nodded slowly. He shook his head. "You shouldn't have camped there. That's where they bury their echoes, the ones that don't pass on." "What do I do?" I asked. "You drive, you don't stop, and you don't speak to anyone who calls your name at night." Since that trip, weird things still happen. Sometimes I'll catch a reflection of myself moving out of sync. Sometimes I hear tapping at my windows at night, even when I'm in the city. The spiral scar appeared once, near my apartment, burned into the grass like it had followed me home. I covered it with rocks. Haven't touched it since. So, if you ever find yourself out there in Navajo Nation, and the land feels too quiet, like it's listening, leave. If you see figures in the distance who all move at once, don't look back. And if something knocks on your door in the dead of night, and it sounds like you, don't open it. You might be letting yourself back in. Last fall, I planned what was supposed to be a peaceful 2-week solo RV trip across southern Utah. just before the cold really starts to settle in. I'd already done a few trips through Arizona and Nevada, but Utah, especially the Navajo Nation region near the Four Corners, had always called to me. There's something spiritual about that land, something heavy and ancient. I just didn't realize how alive it still is. I had mapped out a loose route, with a few marked campgrounds and some dispersed camping spots I'd read about in old hiker forums. The one that caught my eye was a flat, open area near an abandoned trading post about 30 miles south of Bluff. The post was supposedly run by a white couple in the 1940s, but it had shut down decades ago. Since then, the area was said to be quiet, almost too quiet. That's where I decided to spend 3 nights. The first day was uneventful. I arrived around 4 p.m., set up my RV, took a few photos of the wide desert sky, and explored the remains of the trading post. All that was left was the stone foundation, some broken shelves, and a half-buried sign with faded lettering. It felt like time had simply stopped here. That night I sat under the stars. No fire, just darkness and silence. I noticed how sound didn't travel the way it usually does. You could snap a twig or step on gravel and it just fell flat. Like the air was too thick, or like something was absorbing the sound. Around 1 a.m., I heard what I thought was a dog barking in the distance. Not close, far out, maybe on the other side of a canyon ridge. But then it stopped mid-bark, cut off like someone hit mute. I waited. Nothing. Just dead stillness. I went to sleep thinking maybe it was a coyote. But around 3 a.m., I woke up gasping for air. Not from a nightmare, I literally couldn't breathe for a few seconds. It felt like someone was sitting on my chest. When I opened my eyes, the lights in the RV were flickering. The battery was full. There was no reason for that. And then I heard footsteps. Not outside. Inside. I bolted upright and grabbed the flashlight, shined it across the RV, empty. But the footsteps didn't stop. They were soft, slow, circling the bed, like someone dragging bare feet around me. Only when I stood up did they stop completely. I didn't sleep after that. The next day, I left the RV and walked out about a mile east. I'd read there was an old rock carving out there. Some say it was Navajo, others say it was much older. It was a spiral symbol, etched into a stone about 4 feet wide, surrounded by little piles of bones. Animal bones, I hoped. But what freaked me out was the sound that started up the moment I got near it. Buzzing. Like a swarm of bees, but higher pitched. And there were no bugs, no wind, no power lines. Just that stone and that sound. I backed away. The buzzing stopped. Later, I spoke out loud to myself. I'm leaving tomorrow. The moment I said that, I swear to you, the RV's rear-view camera flicked on by itself. The screen lit up and showed a figure standing directly behind the vehicle. But when I stepped outside, nothing was there. That night, things escalated. Around 2 a.m., I was awoken by a voice. A woman whispering. But it wasn't English. It was rhythmic, almost like chanting. The weirdest part? It was coming from the RV's radio, which wasn't even on. I sat there frozen, watching the radio display flicker between random numbers and letters. Then the voice cut out, and a deep, guttural male voice came through, clear as day. It said, "You're not supposed to be here." I jumped up and killed the power. The entire RV went dark. I didn't care. I just wanted it to stop. I sat in the darkness for what felt like hours, listening, waiting. But then, a knock, knock, knock. Right on the back window, the one by the bed, then another, knock, knock, knock. I turned and looked. There was a handprint on the glass, not from the outside, from the inside. That's when I grabbed my keys and decided to leave immediately. I didn't pack, didn't check my map. I just started the RV and drove. The GPS was glitching, spinning in circles. Every road looked the same. Red dirt, black sky, no stars. I was going in circles. Finally, after what must have been 3 hours of aimless driving, I saw a small red light blinking in the distance. A cell tower. Civilization. I followed it like it was the last lighthouse on Earth. When I finally reached a gas station near Mexican Hat, I stumbled out of the RV shaking. I must have looked like a lunatic. The clerk, an older Navajo man, looked at me for a long time and said, "You camped down by the trading post?" I nodded slowly. He took a deep breath. "That ground, it don't sleep easy. They moved the bones too many times. Disturbed things that weren't meant to be touched." I asked him what I could do to fix it, to break whatever I'd brought with me. He said, "You don't fix it. You just don't stop. You don't look back. And when they whisper from the radio again, you turn it off and you don't answer." To this day, the RV still acts up. The radio turns on sometimes, late at night, static, then whispers, and I'll smell dust and smoke like I'm back there again. Once, I found a new handprint on my window, even though I was hundreds of miles away. So, if you're thinking about heading into Navajo Nation for a little off-grid peace and quiet, don't go near the old trading post south of Bluff. Don't park near the Spiral Stone. And if you hear a woman whispering through your speakers in a language you can't understand, she's not talking to you. She's calling something else. And it's already listening. I was never the superstitious type. Not really. I'd heard plenty of ghost stories growing up, but they always felt like just that, stories. Entertainment. Fiction with a touch of exaggeration. But that changed in the fall of 2022 when I took my RV down into Navajo Nation in Utah. It started out as a solo trip. I needed to clear my head after a rough stretch, personal stuff, stress, burnout. I figured some time alone in nature would reset me. Just the road, the sky, and silence. I had done a few solo RV trips before, mostly in Arizona and New Mexico, but this time I wanted to go deeper, somewhere less touched, more real. A friend of mine, someone who had worked as a surveyor, told me about a canyon not far from Monument Valley, tucked into the northern edge of Navajo land. It wasn't a tourist spot, no signs, no maps, just word-of-mouth directions and a dirt road that hadn't seen a grader in years. He said it had some of the darkest skies he'd ever seen, and ancient ruins half swallowed by the red rock cliffs. It sounded perfect. I drove out there in mid-October, right as the temperatures started to dip. The days were warm, the nights were crisp, and the air had that dry, clean edge you only get in the high desert. After bouncing down 20 miles of rutted road and crossing a dry wash, I pulled into the spot he mentioned, a little plateau overlooking a canyon rim. The kind of place where you feel like the only person left on Earth. At first, it was peaceful. I parked, leveled the RV, opened a beer, and watched the sun fall behind the cliffs. No noise, no signal, just silence. It was exactly what I needed. But that first night, something felt off. It wasn't anything loud or dramatic, more like a pressure, like the air itself was heavier than it should be. I remember stepping outside around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom and noticing how quiet it was. Too quiet, no wind, no insects, not even the faint rustle of distant animals, just an unnatural, dead silence. I heard what sounded like a distant humming, faint, low. I thought maybe it was tinnitus or maybe I was just tired. But the weird thing was, the hum would stop if I held my breath. The next day I explored a little, walked the ridge, took photos, even found some rock carvings on a ledge about a quarter mile from the RV. They weren't like the typical petroglyphs you see in tourist spots. These were older, cruder, a spiral with jagged lines shooting out of it, and what looked like a figure with no face, just long arms stretched wide. That night, things got stranger. Around midnight, the lights in the RV flickered and went out. I checked the battery, full. Everything else was fine, but the electronics wouldn't work. No lights, no GPS, nothing. I sat in the dark, thinking maybe it was a blown fuse or something. Then the scratching started. At first, I thought it was a rat or a bird on the roof, but it was too steady, rhythmic. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. It moved from one end of the RV to the other, like whatever it was circling me. I froze, didn't even breathe. And then I heard something tap the window, just once. Software, deliberate. I grabbed a flashlight and shined it out the window, but there was nothing there, just darkness. I stayed up until sunrise. The next morning, I was seriously debating whether to leave, but something told me to stay one more night. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself I wasn't just freaking out, that I was tired, stressed, and imagining things. That night, I made sure everything was locked, shut the blinds, left a flashlight and a knife by my bed, and then I tried to sleep. I woke up around 3:12 a.m. I remembered the time because the oven clock was flashing. Power had gone out again. The RV was cold, freezing cold. I reached for the flashlight, and when I turned it on, I saw something that made my blood run ice. There were footprints on the RV floor. Bare feet, dusty, small, like a child's. They came in from the front door, walked a full circle around where I was sleeping, and stopped at the window by the sink. I didn't hear the door open. I didn't hear anything. I bolted outside, half-dressed, flashlight in hand, looking for anyone, anything. But the desert was empty. No wind, no animals, no sounds. That's when I saw the rock carvings again. I hadn't noticed it before, but something had changed. A new line had been scratched next to the faceless figure. A second figure, smaller, with a spiral where the head should be, and beneath it, 3 scratch marks. I don't know how to explain what I felt in that moment. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something deeper, like realization. Like I had walked into someone else's story, something old and ongoing, and now I was part of it. I didn't sleep. I packed up at first light, didn't even eat. I drove out of there as fast as I could without destroying the suspension on that road. The whole way out, I felt like I was being watched. I didn't see anything, but I felt it, that pressure in the air, that low humming, just under the edge of hearing. When I finally hit pavement, I pulled over and cried. I'm not ashamed to admit it. Whatever I had touched out there, whatever I had seen, wasn't meant for me. And here's the part that haunts me the most. A few weeks later, back home, I got the RV cleaned. I didn't say anything about what happened, but the guy who detailed the inside pulled me aside and asked if I had kids. I said no. Why? He said, it's weird. I found these tiny handprints on the inside of your back window, like a kid was pressing their hands against the glass from the inside. He showed me a photo he took. The prints weren't smudged, they were perfect, like they were made in fine dust. 5 fingers, no thumbs. And in the center of the palm, a small spiral. To this day, I don't know what followed me out of that canyon. I don't know what I saw or what saw me. But I've never been back to Navajo Nation. Never even driven near it. And if you ever find yourself near an unmarked canyon with spiral carvings and silence so deep it makes your ears ring, do yourself a favor. Don't stop, don't explore, don't listen. And if you hear humming when the wind dies down, drive. Just drive. I've always loved solitude, the kind of solitude where you're in nature, surrounded by miles of nothingness, and the only sounds are the wind and the occasional bird cry. That's what led me to the Utah desert, just a few miles off the beaten path in the Navajo Nation. I had my RV packed and ready to go, intending to camp out for a week, just me, the road, and the wide-open desert. It all started with a simple suggestion from an old friend who had lived in Utah for years. He told me about a remote, almost forgotten spot, nestled between the jagged cliffs near the Valley of the Gods. It was off-grid, no service, no other campers for miles. The perfect place for someone like me, who just wanted to disconnect for a while. I took his advice, and after a long drive that stretched into the night, I finally arrived at the spot. A quiet plateau that offered a breathtaking view of the surrounding canyons. The sunset was the kind that made you feel small, like you were just a speck in a vast, untamed world. That first night was uneventful. I parked the RV, set up my camp, and sat outside for a while, watching the stars come out. The desert had its own kind of magic, a stillness that settled into your bones and wrapped around you like a blanket. I felt at peace, disconnected from the chaos of the world. But as I lay in bed that night trying to drift off to sleep, something didn't feel right. It was that nagging feeling, the kind that tells you someone is watching, even though you can't see them. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just the desert playing tricks on me. I wasn't a scared person, and I wasn't about to let my mind play games with me. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of what I thought was a coyote howling in the distance. It was strange, though. The howl sounded different, longer, more drawn out than usual. I sat up in bed listening, but the howl suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, like the whole world had gone mute. I tried to ignore it and rolled back over, but I couldn't sleep. The sound of something scraping against metal kept me awake. It was faint at first, but as the night stretched on, it grew louder, more insistent. It sounded like something was dragging against the side of the RV. I must have lay there for an hour, frozen, listening to the sound inch closer. My mind raced, trying to come up with explanations. A branch brushing against the RV, a wild animal, but it didn't sound right. It didn't sound natural. The scraping finally stopped, and then the worst part came. A knock, just one, on the side of the RV, soft but deliberate. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my flashlight, and threw open the door. There was nothing out there, just the empty desert stretching out into the darkness. No footprints, no signs of any animal, nothing. I told myself it was nothing. A trick of the wind, a falling rock. Maybe I had imagined it. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and tried to go back to sleep. The next morning, I was exhausted, but tried to shake off the nerves. I figured it was just the isolation playing with my mind. I spent the day hiking around the area, exploring some of the rock formations and looking for any signs of wildlife. I didn't see much, just the occasional lizard and the tracks of a few coyotes, but I couldn't stop feeling like I was being watched. That evening, I decided to make a fire and sit outside to enjoy the sunset. The light was soft and golden, casting long shadows across the rocks. But as I sat there, a strange feeling crept up on me. It was like I wasn't alone. Not in the usual way, more like there was something just out of sight, something hidden in the shadows. I felt an overwhelming urge to look behind me, even though I hadn't heard a sound. And when I did, there it was. A figure standing about 100 yards away, just beyond the trees. A person. Or at least, I thought it was. It was hard to make out the details, but they were standing still, watching me. I called out, "Hey, you lost or something?" But the figure didn't move, didn't even flinch. They just stood there staring at me. After a few moments, I decided to walk over. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. Something was off. The air felt thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on me. I reached the spot where the figure had been, but there was no one there. Not a trace, just the desert. My heart pounded in my chest. I knew what I had seen. I wasn't imagining it. But there was no one around. No one but me. I spent the rest of the night inside, bolting all the windows and locking the door. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there just beyond the light. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I woke up to find something that nearly made my blood run cold. There, on the door of the RV, was a handprint. Not a large one. Small, almost childlike. And it wasn't from the outside. It was on the inside of the door, pressed against the glass. I couldn't figure out how it had gotten there. I hadn't opened the door since the night before. I checked the locks. They were still secure. But the print was there, clear as day. A child's hand, palm open, fingers splayed. It was then that I knew something was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. I left. Packed up my things in a hurry, didn't even bother with breakfast. I had to get out of there. I drove all day, back toward civilization, all the while feeling like I was being followed. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I thought I saw something move. A shadow. A figure. When I made it back to town, I stopped at a diner and told the waitress about what had happened. She didn't look surprised, though. Instead, she nodded slowly and said, "You weren't the first to feel that way. People who camp out near that area, they say the land doesn't forget. There are stories about that place. Old ones. About things that were buried there long before the Navajo ever came to this land." I asked her what kind of stories. She just smiled faintly and said, "Things like that. They don't stay buried. They never really leave." I never went back to that desert. I don't know what I saw out there, but I know this. There's something in that land. Something old, something waiting. And it's not done with me yet. It was late October when I decided to take my RV out on a solo camping trip in the heart of Navajo Nation. I'd been feeling suffocated by the constant buzz of city life, the endless rush of work, and the pressure of everything else. So, I packed up and headed out, hoping that the isolation would help me reset. I was no stranger to off-the-beaten-path trips, but this one felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a quiet warning I couldn't put my finger on. I had heard about a spot just south of Bluff, Utah, near the edge of the Monument Valley area. It was secluded, with no roads leading directly to it, and barely anyone knew about it. Perfect. I wanted solitude, real, uninterrupted solitude. My friend, who was familiar with the area, had given me vague directions and told me that it was one of those places where you could truly get away from everything. There was a large, flat area surrounded by tall mesas, with a small wash where you could park an RV and camp for the night. He said it was unforgettable. Driving in, the vast emptiness of the desert stretched out in every direction. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the landscape, and the sky had that eerie shade of orange that only happens in the desert. I was at peace for the first time in a long while. The silence was thick, almost palpable, and the sound of my tires on the dirt road was the only thing breaking it. I finally arrived just before dusk. The spot was just as he described. Quiet, open, and breathtaking. I set up my camp and made a fire, the flames crackling and throwing light against the walls of the canyon. The air had a crisp bite to it, and the temperature dropped rapidly as the sun disappeared. After cooking a simple meal and enjoying the sunset, I settled inside the RV for the night, thinking that this was exactly what I needed, the perfect escape. But as soon as I turned off the lights, I noticed something strange. There was a slight hum in the air, almost imperceptible, like a distant electrical buzz. It wasn't enough to make me worry, but it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I rolled over, trying to ignore it, but it persisted, faintly at first, and then louder as the night deepened. I tried to focus on the sound of the wind outside, the familiar rustling of desert shrubs, but it didn't drown out the hum. It had a rhythm to it, too steady and structured for the wind, and it wasn't coming from anywhere specific. It was everywhere, as if the air itself was vibrating. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped outside. The moment I stepped into the cool night, I felt the weight of something unseen pressing in on me. The hum was louder, but there was no source. I turned the beam of my flashlight in every direction, scanning the desert. Nothing, just endless, dark emptiness. But the hum didn't stop. It seemed to come from the ground itself, as though the very earth was vibrating beneath me. I walked around the RV, my feet kicking up the loose dirt, looking for any sign of what was making the noise. My flashlight flickered as I reached the back of the RV, and that's when I noticed something in the sand. A mark, or maybe a symbol. It was hard to tell, but it was definitely not natural. The lines were too deliberate, too clean. I knelt down to get a better look, and the instant my fingers brushed the ground near the symbol, the hum stopped. Dead silence. That silence lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. Something had shifted, something had changed. It felt like I was no longer alone in the desert. I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that it was just my imagination, a trick of the desert. I went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The silence outside felt wrong, too complete. I kept hearing little noises, taps against the side of the RV, like fingers drumming on metal. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. At some point, I must have dozed off, but I woke up to a cold chill in the air and the distinct sound of movement. It wasn't the usual desert sounds, no wind, no animals, just movement coming from somewhere outside. Slowly, I pulled myself out of bed, grabbed the flashlight again, and stepped out of the RV. My heart was racing, and I felt that same pressure in the air, thick and suffocating. This time, I wasn't looking for a symbol in the sand. I was looking for signs of something, or someone, out there with me. I scanned the area with the flashlight, slowly moving it across the landscape. And then, near the edge of the plateau, I saw it. A figure. A person, standing completely still. They were too far away to make out any details, but I could tell they were facing me. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Hey!" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone out there?" The figure didn't move. I took a step forward, my flashlight beam now fixed on the person. But just as I moved closer, they disappeared. No movement, no sound, just gone. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. I called out again, but there was no answer, no response. Only the eerie, all-encompassing silence of the desert. That was when I noticed something even more unsettling. There were footprints in the sand, fresh ones, leading directly to where I had seen the figure. But there were no other tracks, no signs of anything else nearby. Just those footprints, perfectly clear in the dirt, as if someone had walked right up to me and then vanished. I took a step back, my pulse racing. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to pack up and get out of there. But as I turned to head back to the RV, I felt something tug at the back of my mind, a nagging sensation that I couldn't shake. The wind picked up suddenly, and I heard something faintly in the distance. The hum, that low, vibrating sound, now almost deafening. And then a voice, a whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "Go." I didn't hesitate. I jumped back into the RV, slammed the door shut, and locked it. The hum was getting louder, and the air felt thick, like the entire desert was closing in on me. I started the engine and drove. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I hit the nearest town, and even then, the feeling didn't leave. The silence, the strange figure, the voice, all of it haunted me. And when I told the locals about what had happened, they just looked at me like they'd heard it all before. "You weren't the first," one of them said, "and you won't be the last. There's a reason people don't go out there, not without knowing the land." To this day, I don't know what happened out there. Whether I saw something real, or if it was just my mind playing tricks. But I do know this: I will never return to that place. The desert holds things that are older than us, things we weren't meant to understand. And some places should never be explored. I never thought I'd get caught in a situation like this, but here I am. A trip that was supposed to be a peaceful retreat in the remote Utah desert turned into something far darker than I could have ever imagined. And the scariest part, I'm still not sure what happened or if it's even over yet. It started innocently enough. I've always been one for solo adventures, the kind where you can just lose yourself in nature, away from the noise of everyday life. I've done plenty of camping in isolated spots, but this time, I wanted to try something different. My research led me to a place deep within the Navajo Nation, a forgotten corner of Utah where few ever venture. It was a spot that hadn't been camped at in years, maybe decades. I didn't have precise coordinates, just a vague description from an old article I found about abandoned sites. Follow the dirt road past the hidden canyon, turn at the rock formation shaped like a wolf, and keep going until you see the old stone circle. It sounded mysterious enough to make me want to go. I packed my RV with supplies, filled up on gas, and set off early in the morning, excited for the peace and quiet that would be my companion for the next few days. I made my way through the twisting roads and dirt paths, the landscape growing more and more desolate with each mile. By the time the sun began to dip low in the sky, I was deep in the desert, a vast, unbroken stretch of land that seemed to go on forever. There was no one for miles, not a single car or person in sight. It was just me and the endless horizon. When I finally arrived at the spot I was looking for, the place felt perfect. There was an old stone circle just like the article had described, its stones weathered by time, standing like silent sentinels. It was isolated, surrounded by towering cliffs, and the air was still, as if the world had forgotten this place existed. I parked the RV and set up camp, feeling a wave of satisfaction wash over me as I lit a fire and sat by the flames, watching the sun set behind the red rocks. That night, I went to bed early. I wasn't tired, but the quiet was almost oppressive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I told myself I was being paranoid. The desert can mess with your mind sometimes, and the isolation can make you feel like the land itself is alive, breathing, observing. I woke up in the middle of the night to a noise, soft but unmistakable. It was a whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but no, it was a voice, clear as day, coming from outside the RV. I froze, listening intently, my heart thumping in my chest. The voice was too soft for me to make out any words, but it was definitely there. A whispering voice. I jumped out of bed and checked the windows, but the darkness outside seemed undisturbed, and the fire I had built earlier had burned down to a faint glow. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a coyote or some other creature, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it couldn't be. The voice wasn't like any animal sound I had ever heard. It was too human, too deliberate. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. The unease had settled deep in my bones. I kept hearing the whispers, closer now, as though they were circling the RV. Every few minutes I'd hear the faint scrape of something against the side of the vehicle, like fingers brushing against metal. My mind raced, trying to explain what was happening. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe I was just tired, imagining things. But deep down, I knew it was something more. When the sun finally rose, I was exhausted. I hadn't gotten a wink of sleep. My nerves were shot, but I couldn't leave. Something told me I had to stay, that I had come this far, and I needed to see this place through. So I went outside, trying to shake the dread that clung to me. The desert looked calm under the early morning light, the silence now almost suffocating. I wandered around the stone circle, taking in the odd patterns carved into the rocks. The place had an ancient feel to it, something older than the land itself. That's when I noticed something strange. There were footprints in the sand. Not just any footprints, though. They were fresh, and they were too small to belong to an adult. They were child-sized. I followed the footprints, thinking they were just the marks of a curious hiker or maybe a stray animal. But the tracks didn't lead anywhere normal. They circled around the stone formation, weaving in and out between the rocks, as if whoever, or whatever, had made them had been walking in a pattern. There was no sign of any other person around, no other tracks leading off into the desert. It was like these footprints appeared out of nowhere, only to vanish once they reached the stone circle. A chill ran down my spine. I decided to go back to the RV and get some rest, but as I turned to walk back, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A figure standing at the edge of the plateau, barely visible in the distance. It was hard to make out any details, but it was a person. Or at least, I thought it was. They were standing perfectly still, just watching me. I called out, my voice shaky, "Hey! You lost or something?" The figure didn't move. I took a step toward them, but the figure was gone before I could even get closer. No movement, no sound, just gone. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what I had just seen. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was exhausted from the lack of sleep. But something told me I wasn't alone. Something was out there in the desert with me. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, watched. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hide something just out of sight. The whispers returned that night, louder this time, more insistent, and the scraping sounds against the RV grew more frequent. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, but deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. By the third night, I could no longer ignore the truth. Something was here, something ancient, something that didn't belong in this world. It wasn't just the land. It was something else, something that had been lying in wait, something that had been drawn to my presence, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. I packed up that night in a frenzy, throwing my things into the RV without a second thought. But as I started the engine, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. A figure, standing just outside the stone circle. I slammed the gas pedal and the RV lurched forward, the desert blurring past me in a dizzying rush. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I didn't stop driving until I hit the nearest town, and even then, I could still feel the eyes on me as if something was still following me. I don't know what happened out there. I don't know what I saw, or what was waiting for me in that stone circle. But I do know one thing. That place, that desert, has a life of its own. And sometimes, it calls to people. And if you're unlucky enough to answer, you may never leave. It was supposed to be a break, a chance to get away from the chaos of life for a while. Just me, the open road, and the beauty of the Utah desert. I'd been dreaming about it for months. An RV trip deep into the Navajo Nation, a place I'd heard about from a local guide while working on a project. A hidden corner of the world that seemed forgotten by time, untouched by the hand of development. A perfect spot to spend a few days unwinding in solitude. I've always been an explorer at heart. Something about the silence of the wilderness, the way nature seems to breathe around you, is both peaceful and humbling. There was something calling me to the desert, a place where history and culture ran deep, a place with secrets buried in the dust and the wind. So, with my RV packed to the brim, I set off one early morning, the sun just starting to light up the horizon as I left the last signs of civilization behind me. As I drove deeper into the wilderness, the landscape began to shift. The towering red rock formations rose up from the ground, and the sand turned a deep ochre, the kind of golden hue that you only see in the desert. My phone lost service as I passed into the heart of the Navajo Nation. I didn't mind. It was exactly what I was looking for. A place where I could be free from distractions, where the outside world wouldn't intrude on my thoughts. After hours of driving along bumpy dirt roads, I arrived at the site I'd been searching for. A small, isolated valley surrounded by massive stone cliffs. The moment I stepped out of the RV, the air felt different. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I couldn't quite explain it, but it was an eerie kind of stillness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The site had everything I needed: peace, quiet, and a sense of being completely alone. I set up camp, made a small fire, and settled down to enjoy the evening. The sky stretched out above me, a canvas of stars that seemed to go on forever. I felt small, insignificant in the vastness of the desert, but in a way that was comforting. There was no sound except the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of wind against the rocks. It wasn't until the second night that things began to get strange. I was just finishing my dinner, sitting by the fire when I heard it. A sound I couldn't place. It was like a low hum, a vibration in the air that made the ground beneath me feel alive. I brushed it off as just the wind, but there was something unsettling about it. The hum grew louder, a constant pulse that seemed to come from all directions at once. My eyes scanned the horizon, but I saw nothing. No movement, no figures, just the same barren landscape. Then it stopped. Sudden, complete silence. I didn't know it then, but that was when the presence arrived. I felt the first ripple of it in the air, a heaviness, as though something had just materialized, something that hadn't been there before. My heart raced. My palms started sweating. I glanced around, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows, but there was nothing. I decided to go to bed early, trying to shake the unease that had crept into my mind. But sleep wouldn't come. The hum started again, soft at first, then louder, until it filled the entire space around me. My breathing became shallow, and I found myself clenching the blankets, trying to calm myself. I told myself it was nothing, just the desert playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Then, I heard the whisper, faint but unmistakable. A voice, like a soft breath carried by the wind, but it was more than that. It felt like the words were directed at me. I tried to sit up, but I couldn't move. The voice came again, clearer this time, and the words hit me like a jolt. Leave, before it's too late. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. My eyes flicked around the RV, but it was empty. No one was there. It was impossible. I had been alone all day, and yet the voice was so real, so close. I was sure I wasn't imagining it, but that wasn't the worst of it. The worst part came when I heard the scratching. It started at the RV door, a light tap at first, almost like a twig brushing against the wood, but it soon became harder, faster. Something was clawing at the outside of the RV. I crept to the window and peeked out, half expecting to see an animal, but there was nothing. The area around my RV was empty, still. Just the endless stretch of desert and the shadows cast by the flickering campfire. The scratching continued for hours, never ceasing, and with every pass it seemed to get closer, as though whatever was out there was trying to find its way inside. I spent the rest of the night awake, terrified to sleep, clutching the side of my bed, listening to the sound of whatever was out there scratching and clawing at the walls. It was as if the very earth around me had become alive, restless, aware of my presence. By morning, I was on edge, barely able to keep my eyes open. The sun had risen, casting a golden light across the land, but the peace I had hoped for was gone. The hum still lingered in the air, faint but persistent. I packed my things in a hurry, desperate to leave, but as I was about to start the engine, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood at the edge of the campsite. A man, or something that resembled one. His back was turned to me, and he was staring out across the desert, unmoving. I called out, but he didn't respond. I got out of the RV, my legs trembling, and approached him cautiously. As I drew closer, I noticed something strange. His clothes were old, tattered, like they had been worn for decades. His hair was long and wild, and his skin was pale, almost sickly. But what stood out the most were his eyes. They were completely black, void of any color, like empty voids staring into nothingness. I froze in place, unable to move. My heart slammed against my chest as I called out again, louder this time. But he didn't react. It was like he couldn't hear me, like he didn't even know I was there. I reached out a hand to tap his shoulder, but the moment my fingers touched him, he turned around so quickly that it made me stumble back. His eyes locked with mine, and I felt something shift in the air. A cold, unnatural force washed over me, like the desert itself had swallowed me whole. His lips parted, and for a moment I thought he was going to speak, but all that came out was a hiss, like the wind itself was alive and speaking through him. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It felt like my entire body was frozen in place. And then, just like that, he was gone. I don't know how long I stood there, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. I got back in the RV and drove as fast as I could, not daring to look back. The hum, the whispers, the figure, they all haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, that I hadn't truly escaped the desert. Even now, weeks later, I still feel it. The eyes, the whispers, the scratchings. I don't know what I encountered that night, but I know this. The Navajo Nation isn't just a place. It's alive, and it remembers. If you ever decide to visit, just know this. Some places aren't meant to be found. And once you hear the whispers, once you see the figure, it may be too late to leave. I had always been the kind of person who loved solitude. The more remote, the better. So, When I decided to take my RV on a trip through the southwestern United States, the Navajo Nation in Utah stood out as the perfect destination. A place where I could disconnect from the world, enjoy the vast open spaces, and let my thoughts roam freely. The idea of spending several nights in the middle of nowhere, surrounded only by the land and the stars, was a dream come true for me. The journey started innocently enough. The road stretched before me, winding through the desert, past the occasional gas station or isolated trading post. As I drove deeper into the Navajo Nation, I could feel the isolation settling around me like a thick fog. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears, making every noise seem louder than it really is. I remember seeing the sprawling cliffs in the distance, the jagged edges of the desert landscape that seemed to stand guard over the valley. It was both beautiful and intimidating. I pulled up to my campsite just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of purple and gold. The air was crisp, the kind of dry chill that feels like it could cut through you. I parked my RV near a series of boulders, hoping they would provide some shelter from the wind. It was just me, alone in this vast ancient place. A place where the wind had whispered stories to the land for centuries. I spent the first night alone in peace, cooking a simple meal and watching the stars slowly take over the sky. The kind of stars you can only see in the desert, countless, stretching out in all directions as if the universe itself was spilling across the heavens. But something about the night felt off. The wind was too still, the air too heavy. Every once in a while, I thought I could hear a distant, low hum, like a deep, vibrating pulse coming from the earth itself. I convinced myself it was just the wind or perhaps some animal making an odd noise in the distance. But as the night deepened, the hum started to grow louder, more persistent. At first, it was a faint buzz, almost like an electrical current running beneath the Earth's surface. But then it began to intensify, becoming a constant vibration in the air. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, but it was as though the whole desert was alive with it. It felt like something ancient, something that had been sleeping for centuries, was beginning to stir. I decided to go to bed early, hoping sleep would block out the strange noises. But as soon as I lay down, the vibrations reached a fever pitch. It wasn't just a sound, it was something I could feel in my bones. My RV felt like it was shaking. I sat up, heart racing, and grabbed my flashlight, trying to focus on the outside. I glanced out of the small window, scanning the dark landscape. There was nothing, just the black void of the desert. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was all in my head, that the desert had a way of playing tricks on you. I lay back down, trying to calm my racing thoughts, but sleep would not come. The vibration only intensified, now accompanied by a strange, rhythmic tapping against the side of the RV. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't any animal I knew. It sounded like fingers, tapping, slowly at first, then faster and faster, as if something or someone was desperately trying to get inside. My breath caught in my throat. I grabbed my keys and locked the door, not knowing why, as if locking myself inside would somehow protect me from whatever was out there. The tapping continued for what felt like hours. My heart hammered in my chest, and my palms were slick with sweat. I must have drifted off in a state of half-sleep, because the next thing I knew, the sound stopped. But I wasn't alone anymore. I woke up to a strange sound, a low, guttural growl, like something was just outside, breathing heavily. I froze, holding my breath, listening. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate, too human. The growl was followed by a sharp scraping noise, like claws dragging against metal. I slowly reached for the flashlight and turned it on, my hands trembling. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing. The campsite was empty, the air still. But then, I noticed something odd. The ground around the RV was disturbed, as if something had been moving around it, circling it. There were strange marks in the dirt, deep gouges that looked like they had been made by something with long, sharp claws. I couldn't make sense of it. No animal I knew would have left tracks like that. And yet, it was undeniable. Something had been out there, something large, something dangerous. I spent the next few hours in a daze, terrified to go outside but also too afraid to stay in the RV. I kept hearing that strange tapping again, but now it was coming from all around me. It wasn't just on the RV, it was on the rocks, on the ground, everywhere. It was as if something was trying to get in, trying to reach me. I knew I had to leave, but the thought of driving out into the darkness, away from the safety of the RV, terrified me. The vibration returned, this time stronger than before. I could feel it in my chest, like my entire body was vibrating along with the earth. The growling intensified too, but now it seemed to be all around me. I could hear it coming from the hills, from the rocks, from the very air itself. It was as if something was hunting me, waiting for me to make a move. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to leave. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the RV door, my heart pounding in my ears. But just as I reached for the handle, I heard something that made me freeze. A voice, low and guttural, whispering my name. It was faint at first, just a whisper on the wind. But then it grew louder, clearer. Leave. Now. The voice sounded ancient, like it had been carried through the desert for centuries. It wasn't a human voice, and it wasn't something I could easily describe. It sounded like the land itself was speaking, warning me. And I knew, deep down, that I had to go. I didn't look back as I sped away from the campsite, the RV bouncing along the uneven desert roads. The hum, the growling, the tapping, they all faded into the distance, but the memory stayed with me. It wasn't just the desert that was alive. It was something deeper, something older. The Navajo people had always spoken of spirits that inhabited the land, and I had no doubt that I had encountered something beyond my understanding. To this day, I don't know what happened out there, what I encountered, or what I was being warned about. But I can never forget the voice, the growl, and the tapping that echoed in the night. And I know this for sure. The Navajo Nation is not just land. It is a living, breathing entity, and sometimes it doesn't take kindly to outsiders who disturb its peace. If you ever find yourself driving through that part of Utah, remember this. The desert isn't as empty as it seems. There are things out there, things waiting, and they may be more alive than you could ever imagine. I've always loved the idea of escaping from the noise of the world, the idea of disconnecting, leaving behind the constant hum of cities, and just being alone in nature. It's always called to me. So when I found myself planning a solo RV trip through the southwestern United States, I decided to venture deep into the Navajo Nation in Utah. The land there was vast, empty, and rich with history, and I couldn't resist the idea of exploring it for a few days in total isolation. I packed my RV with all the essentials, food, water, a few books, and my trusty camera. The route was simple. Drive deep into the heart of the Navajo Nation, find a remote camping spot, and just take in the beauty of the land. The rugged desert terrain, the towering mesas, and the endless sky above promised the perfect escape from the distractions of everyday life. The first day was uneventful. I drove through winding roads, passing the occasional distant family dwelling or small trading post. The landscape was breathtaking. Huge, open valleys dotted with red rock formations that looked like ancient sentinels standing watch over the land. The Navajo Nation was an area steeped in history, with stories of spirits, ancient tribes, and sacred lands echoing through the air. I was excited to see it all, to feel the mystery of the place wash over me. By the time I found a spot to camp, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the desert floor. I parked my RV near a cluster of boulders, hoping they would offer some protection from the wind. The air was cool, and the sky was painted in hues of orange and purple. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. The kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums, making every little sound seem unnervingly loud. I cooked a simple dinner and sat outside, watching the stars slowly come to life as the darkness crept in. The wind was still, which was unusual for this area. There was always a breeze in the desert. But tonight, everything felt different. The air had an unnatural stillness to it, as though the world itself was holding its breath. As the night wore on, I felt an odd sense of unease creep into my chest. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was more like the feeling of being watched, the sensation that something, or someone, was observing me from the shadows. I couldn't shake it. Every rustle in the brush, every shift in the wind made me jump. I tried to push it aside, telling myself I was just being paranoid, that it was nothing more than the wilderness playing tricks on my mind. But then came the sound. It was a low, guttural growl that seemed to rise from the earth itself. It wasn't an animal. It was too deep, too resonant. It vibrated through my bones, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My heart started to race, and I scanned the area around me with my flashlight. There was nothing, just the emptiness of the desert stretching out in all directions. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something close. I decided to go to bed, hoping sleep would block out the unsettling sounds. But that didn't help either. As soon as I laid down, I heard it again. The growl, followed by a strange scraping noise, like claws dragging against rock. It sounded close, too close. I sat up in bed, my flashlight trembling in my hand. There was no way an animal could make that sound. It wasn't right. I spent the next few hours lying wide awake, listening to the noises. The growl came again, and this time I could hear something else. Something faintly tapping against the side of the RV. Not the wind, no, this was deliberate. It was like fingers tapping, slow at first, then faster, then erratically. Something, or someone, was trying to get inside. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, pounding, pounding, each thud louder than the last. The tapping continued, relentless, until it suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. I lay there, terrified, wondering what to do. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. I kept telling myself it was just the desert, that the isolation was playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew I wasn't alone. I must have eventually fallen asleep, exhausted from the constant tension. But I woke up the next morning feeling more drained than when I went to bed. The events of the previous night were fresh in my mind, but I tried to push them aside. I needed to shake off the fear. I wasn't going to let this land get the best of me. But as I stepped outside to greet the new day, I noticed something unsettling. The ground around the RV was disturbed, large, deep gouges in the dirt, as if something massive had been walking around it during the night. I knelt down to inspect the marks. They were too large to be made by any animal I knew, and they had a strange, almost deliberate pattern to them. It was like something had been circling me, watching. I felt a wave of dread wash over me, but I refused to let it control me. I had come here to enjoy the solitude, and I wasn't going to let anything chase me away. I packed up the RV, ready to hit the road again and explore more of the desert. But as I started the engine, a strange, high-pitched ringing filled the air. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, louder, until it seemed to be coming from everywhere. The sound vibrated through the RV, making the walls buzz. I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible to escape. The ringing continued, a constant shrill noise that seemed to claw at my eardrums. And then I saw it. A figure standing in the distance, just outside the beam of my headlights. It was tall, too tall, and its shape was wrong. The silhouette was thin, almost impossibly thin, and it didn't move like a person. It was as if it was gliding, sliding across the ground with unnatural speed. I froze, my foot hovering over the gas pedal. My mind screamed at me to drive away, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. It was staring at me, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Two cold, empty orbs that seemed to pierce through the night. The ringing was deafening now, and I could feel the vibrations in my chest like it was coming from the very earth beneath me. I snapped back to reality, my foot slamming down on the gas pedal. The RV lurched forward, jerking me out of the trance I had been in. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just drove, faster and faster, through the desert, until the ringing slowly faded, and the figure disappeared from view. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town. I parked my RV in a small gas station, the lights harsh and cold against the darkness. I sat there for a long time, my hands still shaking, my mind racing. I couldn't explain what happened out there. The growls, the tapping, the figure, I couldn't make sense of it. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back. Not ever. To this day, I don't know what I encountered out there in the desert. Some people would call it a hallucination. Others would say it was just the stress of being alone in a vast, empty place. But I know what I felt. I know what I saw. And whatever it was, it's still out there, waiting, watching, just beyond the reach of the light. If you ever find yourself traveling through the Navajo Nation, especially deep in the desert where the land stretches on forever, remember this. Some places are better left undisturbed. The land has its own secrets, and some of them are better left untouched. It was a late autumn evening when I decided to take a detour during a road trip through Utah, winding my way through the endless stretches of desert land. I had been on the road for hours, and my GPS directed me through remote areas I hadn't seen before. At first, it seemed like a simple way to get from one point to another, but that decision would lead me into something I couldn't have prepared for, something that would haunt me forever. I had always been drawn to the idea of getting away from it all. The thought of camping out in isolation, away from the noise and bustle of the world, had always appealed to me. So, I took a turn off the highway when I saw a sign for the Navajo Nation. It read, "Remote camping sites. Explore the untouched beauty of the desert." The sign seemed almost too inviting, and before I knew it, I was driving deeper into the vast emptiness of the desert landscape. The land around me was stark. Harsh, jagged cliffs, and the occasional low bush dotted the landscape. The sun was sinking lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the road, turning everything into a shadowy, surreal scene. I didn't mind the solitude at first. In fact, it felt peaceful. The loneliness of the desert felt like a balm, and I was happy to just drive, listening to the sound of tires on the pavement and the hum of the engine. But as the sun set and the sky began to darken, something in the air shifted. I couldn't explain it, but the silence started to feel heavier. It wasn't just quiet, it was oppressive, as though the land itself was watching me. There were no animals, No birds, no signs of life at all. Just the barren land stretching for miles. I finally came across a small, unmarked turnoff leading up to a secluded campsite. It was isolated, which was exactly what I wanted. I pulled off the road and parked my RV next to a group of large, craggy boulders that jutted out from the earth like ancient guardians of the desert. The wind picked up, stirring the sand and dust, but I didn't mind. It added to the atmosphere, making everything feel even more desolate. I spent the first few hours cooking a simple dinner and reading a book inside the RV, the only light coming from a small lamp and the flickering of my stove. The sound of the wind outside was constant, like a distant whisper. It was almost hypnotic, and I felt myself getting drowsy. As night fully settled in, I closed the windows and began to prepare for bed. That's when the first noise caught my attention. It was faint at first, just a rustling sound coming from outside the RV. I brushed it off as the wind, maybe some animals moving through the brush. But then it came again, louder, more distinct. Something was moving just outside my RV. I felt my pulse quicken as I stood up, walking toward the window. I peered out into the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. The desert was as still as ever, and the wind had died down. Still, the rustling continued. It was moving around the RV now, circling it. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, my thoughts racing. What kind of animal would be so bold? I reached for my flashlight, flicking it on and shining it through the window. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty desert. I waited, holding my breath. The rustling stopped. I tried to shake it off, but my gut told me something wasn't right. I locked the doors, closed the blinds, and crawled back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. But I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the noise. Louder now, more defined in my memory. Suddenly, there was a loud thud on the side of the RV. I jumped out of bed, heart racing. The thud had come from the back, near the storage compartment. I grabbed a crowbar from the toolkit I kept in the corner of the RV, ready to defend myself. The thudding came again, this time more forceful, followed by a scraping noise. Something sharp dragging across the metal. I backed up toward the front of the RV, my breathing quick and shallow. I knew I had to get out of there, but I couldn't just leave my vehicle behind. I couldn't abandon my things, and I didn't know if something was already inside the RV, watching me. My mind raced for a plan. That's when I heard a voice. It was faint at first, so faint that I thought I might have imagined it. But then, it came again, more distinct this time, low, guttural, a sound that could only be described as a whisper. It seemed to come from all around me, as if the very air was speaking. "I see you." I froze, the crowbar slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. The voice was unmistakable, and it was so close. But there was no one there. "Go away," I whispered to myself, hoping that somehow my words would make it all stop. But the voice didn't go away. Instead, it grew louder, more insistent. "You can't leave." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I took a slow step toward the door, hoping to escape this nightmare. But before I could even reach the handle, there was another loud bang. This time, it came from the roof. Something was crawling on top of the RV. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the keys. I didn't know what was happening, but all of my instincts were screaming at me to get out of there. I managed to unlock the door and throw it open, but the moment I stepped outside, I felt something grab my ankle. I screamed, but no one could hear me out there. I kicked and struggled, finally breaking free from whatever had its hold on me. The moment I got out of the RV, I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. The landscape was a blur as I sprinted through the desert, the cold air biting at my face. Behind me, I could hear the noise again, scraping, rustling, that voice calling my name. When I finally reached the highway, I turned around to look back. My RV was there, still, parked in the same spot. But something was different. The lights inside were on, flickering, and the shape of something dark moved past the windows. A shadow. It wasn't human. I didn't stop running until I reached the nearest gas station. I was out of breath, covered in dirt and sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The attendant looked at me like I was crazy when I told him what happened, but I didn't care. I didn't know what that was, whatever it was that followed me out there, but I knew it wasn't human. I couldn't get the image of that shadow out of my mind, the way it seemed to move with a purpose, watching me, waiting. And I couldn't help but feel like I had narrowly escaped something that would have followed me forever. I never went back to that campsite. I never returned to the Navajo Nation. And to this day, I don't know what it was that I encountered, but I can still hear the whispers in the wind when I close my eyes. If you ever find yourself alone out there, deep in the desert, in the Navajo Nation, remember this. There are places where the land holds secrets, and sometimes it doesn't want you to leave. It was a late October evening when I found myself driving through the vast emptiness of the Utah desert, looking for a quiet place to park my RV and spend the night. I had always enjoyed the isolation of the wilderness, the feeling of being completely cut off from the world. This time, however, something felt different. Something about the air felt heavier, as if the land itself was holding its breath. I had been driving for hours, lost in my thoughts, when I spotted a sign for the Navajo Nation. I had heard a lot about this area, its rich culture and its hauntingly beautiful landscapes, but I had never ventured deep into the heart of the reservation before. The idea of experiencing something new, something remote, appealed to me. I pulled off the main road and followed a winding path that led into the mountains. As the sun began to set, the landscape around me transformed. The desert gave way to towering, rugged cliffs and deep canyons that seemed to stretch on forever. The air grew colder, and the wind started to pick up, swirling the dust in the air. I kept driving, hoping to find a quiet spot to camp for the night. After what felt like hours, I finally stumbled upon a small, unmarked campsite. It was nestled between two massive rock formations, completely isolated. There was no one else around for miles, and the silence was overwhelming. I parked my RV and got out, taking in the vastness of the desert. The only sound was the wind howling through the canyon. It was peaceful, but there was something unsettling about it. As I started to set up camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and every time the wind would gust, I'd feel a chill crawl up my spine. I tried to push the feeling aside, convincing myself it was just the isolation playing tricks on my mind. I continued with my routine, starting a small fire and preparing a simple meal. The night seemed to drag on, and I couldn't help but feel more and more on edge. I had always been an avid hiker, so the idea of camping alone didn't bother me. But tonight, there was something about this place that didn't sit right with me. The wind continued to howl, and every now and then, I would hear what sounded like footsteps in the distance. I would stop whatever I was doing and listen, but the sound would always stop before I could pinpoint its source. I began to wonder if I was just imagining things. As I sat by the fire, trying to shake the uneasy feeling, I heard a voice. It was soft, like a whisper, carried by the wind. At first, I thought it was just the wind again, but then I heard it more clearly. "Leave." The voice was low and haunting, and it sent a wave of cold fear through me. I stood up, looking around in the darkness, but there was nothing. No movement, no figure, just the pitch-black desert and the flickering fire. I chalked it up to my imagination, a trick of the wind, and decided to go to bed. I locked the doors of the RV and crawled into bed, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. But sleep didn't come easily. The voice kept echoing in my mind, and the sounds of footsteps outside my RV grew louder. At one point, I swear I heard something scrape against the side of the vehicle, like claws running along the metal. I jumped out of bed and grabbed a flashlight, shining it through the windows. There was nothing there, nothing but darkness. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was just an animal, I thought. The area was full of wildlife. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold, an eerie, low growl. It was close, too close. I froze, holding my breath, listening. The growl came again, followed by a series of heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate. They circled the RV, like something was stalking me. My heart pounded in my chest as I gripped the flashlight, ready to defend myself. The footsteps stopped. The growling ceased. And then there was complete silence. I waited for what felt like an eternity, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. My mind raced. What was out there? What did it want? I had no answers. I just knew I had to get out of there. But then the voice came again, this time louder, more insistent. Leave, or it will take you. My body tensed. There was no mistaking it now. It wasn't my imagination. There was something out there, something that didn't want me there. I quickly grabbed my things and rushed to start the engine of the RV, but the engine wouldn't turn over. I tried again, my hands shaking, but it was no use. My heart sank. The engine had completely stalled. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. I could hear the growl again, louder this time, closer. I could feel something moving just outside the RV, something large, something with weight. My mind raced as I frantically searched for a way out. The growl became a snarl, deep and guttural, and I could hear something scraping against the metal exterior, as though claws were digging into the sides of the RV. I knew I had to leave, but I had no way to escape. I grabbed my backpack, my phone, and a flashlight and made a break for it. I didn't care where I was going, I just had to get away. I ran out the door of the RV, heart pounding in my chest, my legs screaming as I sprinted into the night. The wind howled around me, and I could hear the growls getting closer. I didn't dare look back, not wanting to see what was chasing me. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert, but I couldn't focus on anything but putting as much distance between me and whatever that thing was. I ran for what felt like miles, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until I finally stumbled upon an old dirt road. Exhausted, I collapsed, my body trembling with fear. But as I lay there, gasping for breath, I heard something that chilled me to the bone. The growling stopped, and in the distance I heard a whisper, as faint as the wind. "Don't come back." The voice was distant, but I knew it was meant for me. It was a warning that whatever I had encountered out there, whatever I had disturbed, wasn't something to be trifled with. I never returned to that campsite. I never returned to the Navajo Nation. And to this day I can't explain what happened that night. But I do know one thing for sure. There are places out there, ancient places, sacred places, where the land itself doesn't want you. And if you're not careful, it will make sure you never leave. It was a crisp fall evening when I first heard about the Navajo Nation campsite, nestled deep within the mountains of Utah. I had been on the road for days, traveling alone in my RV, seeking solitude, and a break from the constant noise of the world. The idea of finding a quiet, isolated place in the middle of nowhere seemed like the perfect escape. I had heard of the Navajo Nation before, its rich culture and its ancient lands, but I had never ventured deep into the heart of it. Something about the desert's rugged beauty and its haunting reputation drew me in. I decided to stop for the night at a remote campsite that was supposed to be one of the most peaceful and untouched areas in the reservation. The road leading there was long and winding, filled with sharp turns and steep inclines, but I was in no rush. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light across the desert landscape, and I felt at peace as I cruised along. The drive was calm, and the scenery was breathtaking, with the mountains looming on either side and the sky changing to shades of orange and purple. As I reached the turnoff for the campsite, I noticed a faded sign indicating the entrance to the area. It was a rough road, but my RV was built for such terrain, so I pushed forward. The further I drove, the more isolated I became. The land grew barren, with no signs of life, just the vast expanse of desert stretching out in every direction. The sun dipped lower and lower, and the temperature dropped, but I wasn't concerned. I had my RV to keep me warm, and I was accustomed to camping in remote places. After a while, I reached the campsite. It was tucked between two jagged rock formations, isolated from the world around it. There were no other vehicles, no signs of human activity. It was eerily quiet, with only the whisper of the wind sweeping across the land. I parked my RV and stepped outside, taking in the serenity of the surroundings. The view was stunning, just pure wilderness. But there was something about the place that felt strange. The silence was too perfect, too complete. It felt like the land was holding its breath, as if something ancient and unseen was watching me. I tried to shake off the feeling and began setting up camp. I started a fire, not for warmth, but for light and a sense of comfort. As I worked, the shadows grew longer, and the wind began to pick up, carrying with it a strange, almost unnatural chill. The temperature seemed to drop drastically, and the air began to feel dense, heavy, like it was full of something unseen. I couldn't explain it, but I felt an unease creeping up on me. By the time the fire was blazing, the sun had completely set, leaving only the moon to illuminate the landscape. The quiet of the desert had turned into something oppressive. The wind howled through the canyon, and the occasional rustling of something unseen would send shivers down my spine. But I tried to brush it off. It was just the wilderness, right? Animals, maybe, or just the wind playing tricks on me. I ate my dinner quickly, the unease gnawing at me. I couldn't help but feel like I wasn't alone. As I sat by the fire, I noticed something strange. In the distance, beyond the camp, there was a shadow moving. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks, but it was too deliberate, too purposeful. The shadow seemed to move in and out of the rocky outcrops, as if it were circling the camp. My heart started to race. I didn't know what it was, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. I stood up and grabbed my flashlight, shining it across the land. There was nothing. Just the dark desert, the flickering fire, and the stillness of the night. But my gut told me something was wrong. Something wasn't right about this place. The wind seemed to carry whispers now, soft, faint, barely audible but unmistakable. I couldn't make out the words, but it was almost as though the land itself was speaking. The night dragged on, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. I tried to stay calm, tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the unease continued to build. I decided to retreat into the safety of my RV, locking the door behind me. The sound of the wind outside was deafening now, but I crawled into bed, hoping to get some sleep. But sleep didn't come. I kept hearing strange noises outside. The soft rustle of what sounded like footsteps, the scrape of something against the ground, like claws on stone. My mind raced, and I tried to ignore the fear creeping up my spine. But every time I closed my eyes, I heard the noises again, louder this time, closer. My heart pounded in my chest as I lay there in the dark, unable to move, unable to make sense of what was happening. Then I heard it, a low growl, barely audible at first, but growing louder, more distinct. It was coming from outside the RV. The growl sounded almost animal, but there was something unnatural about it. It didn't belong to any creature I knew. My breath caught in my throat as the growl turned into a low, guttural voice, speaking in a language I didn't understand. The voice was chilling, full of malice. And then it said one word: "Leave." I froze, unable to breathe, unable to think. The voice wasn't just outside, it was inside my head. I could feel it deep in my bones, and it was clear. It wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was something else. Something ancient. Something that had been here long before I ever set foot in this land. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to escape whatever was out there, whatever was watching me. I grabbed my keys, fumbling with them in my panic, but my hands were shaking too badly to start the RV. The growl came again, louder this time, almost as if it were right outside the door. I looked out the small window, but all I could see was darkness. Nothing but the black desert stretching out before me. I decided to leave. I wasn't going to stay another minute. I had to get out of there no matter what. I threw open the RV door and stepped out into the night, my heart pounding in my chest. The temperature had dropped significantly, and the wind whipped around me, cold and biting. I had no plan, no direction, but I had to get away from whatever was stalking me. As I stumbled through the desert, the growl followed me, echoing in the distance, getting closer. The land felt alive, like it was shifting beneath my feet. The wind carried whispers again, and this time I could almost make out the words, "You shouldn't have come." I ran as fast as I could, not looking back, not caring where I was going. The darkness pressed in around me, and I could feel the weight of something chasing me, just out of sight. My legs were burning, my breath ragged, but I didn't stop. The feeling of dread and terror was overwhelming, and I couldn't shake the sense that something was coming for me. Eventually, I reached the highway. I didn't know how far I had run, but I didn't care. I was out of the desert. I was safe. I stood there, panting, my mind spinning. I looked back toward the land, toward the campsite, but there was nothing there. No movement, no sounds, just the quiet emptiness of the desert. I never went back to that place. The Navajo Nation holds secrets, ancient and dark. And some places, no matter how beautiful, should be left alone. The land doesn't want visitors, and sometimes it will make sure you know that. To this day, I can't shake the feeling of that growl, of that voice in the dark. And every time I think about that night, I hear the whispers on the wind, reminding me that some things are better left undiscovered. It was the kind of night where the wind howled across the desert, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust. I had been traveling for days, seeking peace, escaping the noise of the world, and the thought of a quiet night in an isolated campsite in the Navajo Nation seemed like the perfect remedy. The air was crisp, and the stars above seemed to stretch endlessly, each one a distant, flickering reminder of the vast emptiness that surrounded me. I had heard stories of the Navajo Nation's beauty, but I had also heard whispers of its darker side, the kind of side that people tend to speak of only in hushed tones. They talked about the skinwalkers, the spirits that roamed the land, taking on the form of animals and humans, and the haunting presence that lingered in certain places. But I wasn't a believer in those kinds of stories. I thought of them as just that, stories. My only concern was the solitude of the land and the peace I could find there. I found a small remote campsite on the edge of a canyon. The place was desolate, tucked away between two large rock formations with only a few faint tire tracks leading in. I parked my RV, the only sign of life in the surrounding wilderness, and set up camp. There was an eerie silence about the place, the kind that felt like the land itself was waiting for something. But I ignored it. The fire crackled as I prepared my dinner, and the stars above began to shine brighter, casting an almost unnatural light over the desert floor. As I sat by the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a strange stillness in the air, a quiet that pressed against me, making it harder to breathe. The wind had died down, but the temperature dropped rapidly, and I could feel the chill in my bones. I wrapped myself in a blanket and stared into the fire, trying to ignore the sense of unease creeping up on me. That's when I heard it. A low sound in the distance. At first, it was just a rustle, barely perceptible over the crackling of the fire. But then it came again, louder this time, like the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. I turned my head, expecting to see another camper or perhaps a wild animal, but there was nothing, just the endless stretch of desert and the faint outline of the canyon walls. I shook it off, assuming it was just the wind or some nocturnal animal moving through the brush. But then the sound came closer. The crunching of gravel followed by something else, something more deliberate. It was a slow, rhythmic sound, like footsteps. I stood up, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I called out, my voice tentative, "Hello? Is someone out there?" There was no answer. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I waited, heart racing, unsure of what to do. Should I check outside? Should I stay inside the RV, where I was safe? My curiosity won out, and I grabbed my flashlight, shining it toward the sound of the footsteps. I could see nothing but the faint outline of rocks and brush, the soft glow of the flashlight illuminating the shadows. Then, just as I was about to turn back, I saw it. A figure, standing at the edge of the campsite, just beyond the firelight. At first, I thought it was a person, but something about the way it stood, still, motionless, sent a shiver down my spine. The figure was tall, too tall, with its back turned toward me. I called out again, my voice shaky. "Hey, is everything okay?" It didn't move. I took a step forward, my flashlight beam now focused on the figure. That's when I saw it. The face was obscured by a hood, a shadowy figure with no discernible features. The skin, if it could be called that, was dark, like burnt leather, and the air around it seemed to shimmer, as if the very atmosphere was bending. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't human, it couldn't be. The figure began to turn slowly, its head swiveling in an unnatural, jerky motion, and that's when I saw the eyes. They were black, empty, like two hollow voids staring right through me. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest, and that's when I heard it. The voice, low and guttural, coming from the figure. It was a whisper, but it carried on the wind, clear and cold. "Leave this place, now." The words echoed in my mind, reverberating with an unnatural weight. Every cell in my body screamed for me to run, to get in the RV and drive as fast as I could. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, caught in the grip of something beyond my understanding. Then the figure took a step toward me. I don't know how, but I broke free from the trance-like state. I turned and bolted for the RV, my feet barely touching the ground as I scrambled to unlock the door. I slammed it shut behind me and locked it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The wind picked up again, howling through the canyon, and I could hear something moving outside, the sound of something scraping against the ground, like claws on stone. The air felt thick, heavy, and oppressive, and I knew that whatever was out there wasn't going to stop. I grabbed my keys, started the RV, and with trembling hands, I threw it in gear. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The thought of what was out there, in the darkness, was enough to push my foot down harder on the gas pedal. As I sped down the narrow road, the headlights illuminating the twisted path ahead, I thought I saw something in my rearview mirror. Something tall and dark, standing at the edge of the campsite, watching me leave. I couldn't be sure, but the feeling of being followed never left me. I didn't stop until I was miles away from that cursed place. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, in the shadows, waiting. I never spoke about what happened that night, but to this day, I can't help but wonder, was it just my mind playing tricks? Or was there something far older, far darker, roaming the lands of the Navajo Nation? I'll never know for sure. But I do know one thing. I never went back. And I never will. It was late spring, and the weather had just begun to warm up, coaxing me to take a break from the grind and hit the road. I had been longing for a solitary camping trip, far away from the noise and distractions of the city. I'd spent countless hours researching the perfect location, and after much consideration I decided to head to the Navajo Nation in Utah. It seemed like the ideal spot to disconnect. Peaceful, remote, and steeped in the rich culture and history of the Navajo people. I packed my RV with all the essentials, including food, water, a sleeping bag, and a portable stove. I made sure I had plenty of fuel for the journey and double-checked that my gear was in good condition. Everything was set, and I was eager to escape the chaos and immerse myself in nature. The drive was long and tiring, but the further I went, the more I could feel the weight of the world lifting off my shoulders. The red rock formations and desert landscape were breathtaking, their sheer beauty almost otherworldly. There was a sense of isolation here that felt comforting, like I was in a place untouched by time. When I finally arrived, I found a quiet spot nestled between two large mesas, far from the nearest road. The silence was profound. Only the sound of the wind rustling the sagebrush and the occasional call of a distant bird. I parked my RV, set up camp, and spent the evening sitting by the fire, watching the stars appear one by one. There was a tranquility to the place that I couldn't describe, but something about it also felt wrong. It was as though the land itself was holding its breath. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't entirely alone. The campfire cast flickering shadows around me, and every so often I thought I saw something moving just beyond the light's reach. At first, I dismissed it as the wind, or maybe a coyote passing by, but the sensation lingered. I could feel eyes on me, but when I looked around, there was nothing there. I decided to retreat into the RV for the night. I locked the doors, drew the blinds, and tried to calm my racing mind. I had no reason to be afraid. There were no other campers for miles, and the area was far from any known danger zones. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that gripped me. I eventually fell asleep, but it was a restless sleep, filled with fragmented dreams that I couldn't quite remember upon waking. The next morning, I woke early, determined to put the weird feeling behind me. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden light over the desert. I made a pot of coffee, sat outside the RV, and tried to enjoy the serenity of the morning. That's when I noticed it. Footprints. They were just outside my camp, leading from the edge of the campsite into the rocky desert beyond. They were large, deep, and unmistakable. Human-like, but something about them didn't seem quite right. The toes were too long, and the stride was too wide. The footprints were uneven, as though whoever, or whatever, had made them didn't walk in a straight line. A chill ran down my spine as I examined them more closely. It was impossible that anyone had walked by without me hearing them. The ground was too hard, the terrain too rugged. I was alone, or so I thought. I checked my RV, locked tight as it had been the night before, and found no signs of forced entry. Still, the unease grew, gnawing at me. I spent the rest of the morning trying to ignore it, telling myself that the footprints were probably just from a large animal, maybe a bear or a wild boar. But in my gut, I knew something wasn't right. That afternoon, I decided to go for a hike, hoping the exercise and fresh air would clear my mind. I took my camera, planning to capture the sweeping desert views and the stunning rock formations. I followed the trail that ran along the base of the mesa, climbing higher as the day wore on. The higher I got, the more isolated I felt, as though the land was closing in around me. There was no sound, nothing but the crunch of my boots on the dusty ground. It was then that I noticed something strange. Up ahead, just beyond the trail, there was a small, abandoned shack, half buried in sand and rock. It looked out of place, its weathered wood darkened by time, as if it had been left to decay for decades. Curiosity got the better of me, and I veered off the trail to investigate. As I approached the shack, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The air around it felt heavy, thick, as though it was saturated with an energy that made my skin crawl. The door creaked slightly in the wind, and I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. Inside was nothing but dust and cobwebs, old furniture collapsed and decaying, and the remnants of a fire pit in the corner. It seemed as though no one had lived here for years. But then I noticed something on the floor. A symbol, scratched into the wooden planks. It was crude, the lines jagged and uneven, but unmistakable. A circle with jagged lines extending outward, forming a kind of star. I'd seen symbols like this before, in old books about the Navajo culture, but this one felt wrong, dark somehow. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The wind picked up, howling through the cracks in the shack, and I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to leave. As I turned to go, I heard something. A voice, faint and distant, carried on the wind. It was almost impossible to make out, but it sounded like a warning. An ancient voice, speaking a language I didn't understand. I ran back to the RV, the weight of the strange experience pressing down on me. By the time I reached the RV, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the desert. I locked myself inside and tried to calm my nerves. The wind had picked up again, but this time it felt different, more menacing, like it was whispering something to me, something I didn't want to hear. That night, the strange events took a darker turn. I woke to the sound of scratching at the door of the RV, slow, deliberate, like something was trying to get in. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The scratching continued, then came the sound of footsteps, heavy, dragging footsteps. I peeked through the blinds, but I saw nothing, only the dark, empty desert stretching out before me. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, heart racing. I shone the beam across the campsite, but everything was still. Yet the air felt thick, charged, like something was lurking just out of sight. The footsteps continued, now closer, as if something, or someone, was circling the RV. I felt a cold gust of wind brush against my face, and then a voice. This time, it was clearer. Leave. Now. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys, started the RV, and without a second thought, I drove. The entire ride felt like I was being pursued, the feeling of being watched never leaving me. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, hours away from the Navajo Nation. To this day, I don't know what I encountered that night. The footprints, the shack, the whispers on the wind. They all felt like a warning, an ancient presence that still lingers in the desert, waiting for anyone foolish enough to disturb it. I haven't been back to that place since, and I never will. There are some places where the land itself holds secrets, secrets that should never be uncovered. I had always been a skeptic. I didn't believe in ghosts, spirits, or anything that couldn't be explained by logic or science. I had grown up hearing stories about strange occurrences, eerie encounters, and unexplained events, but I always brushed them off as mere superstition or coincidence. That is, until the summer of 2023, when I went on a solo camping trip to the Navajo Nation in Utah. It was a decision I would come to regret, but at the time, it felt like the perfect escape. I needed time to clear my head, to disconnect from the constant bombardment of news, social media, and the demands of modern life. The idea of spending a few days alone in the vast, untouched desert was exactly what I needed. No distractions, no obligations, just me, the open sky, and the serenity of the wilderness. I had read about the beauty of the Navajo Nation, the sweeping desert landscapes, the stunning red rock formations, and the ancient ruins hidden in the folds of the land. But what I didn't know, what no one had told me, were the stories. The stories of the spirits that roamed the land, the creatures that watched from the shadows, and the ancient untold forces that were said to linger in the quiet places. I arrived on a late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows over the desert floor as I drove deeper into the heart of the Navajo Nation. The road was rough, but the landscape was breathtaking. Endless stretches of red rock, mesas rising like giant sentinels, and the occasional glimpse of wildlife. It was remote, isolated, and perfect for what I had in mind. I found a secluded spot near a small canyon, surrounded by rugged terrain and towering cliffs. It was peaceful, eerily so, and I felt a sense of solitude that I hadn't experienced in years. I parked my RV, set up camp, and went about the familiar ritual of starting a fire, cooking a simple dinner, and settling in for the night. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the temperature dropped, and the desert night settled in. I sat by the fire, watching the flames dance and listening to the sounds of the night, the occasional rustle of wind through the sagebrush, the distant call of a coyote. The stars above were impossibly bright, a blanket of light stretching out across the sky. But then, something changed. I'm not sure exactly when it started, but at some point during the night I began to feel watched. It wasn't a physical sensation, but more of a deep, unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach. I glanced around the campsite, half expecting to see someone standing just beyond the light of the fire. But there was nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the vast silence of the desert. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild, but the feeling only grew stronger. It wasn't just the sensation of being watched, it was something more. There was a presence, a force, something ancient and powerful that seemed to be looming just outside my perception. I decided to go for a walk, hoping the exercise and fresh air would help clear my mind. I grabbed a flashlight, my camera, and my backpack, and I set off toward the canyon, the only sound the crunch of gravel under my boots. The moon was high, casting long shadows on the desert floor, and the air was cool against my skin. As I walked deeper into the canyon, I noticed something strange. The path was faint, barely visible in the moonlight, and the terrain became rougher, more uneven. But what really caught my attention was the silence. There were no sounds, no rustling leaves, no chirping insects, not even the wind. It was as though the entire desert had gone still, holding its breath. I paused for a moment, looking around, but all I saw were rocks, cliffs, and the vast emptiness stretching out in every direction. And then I heard it, a low, guttural growl. It was distant at first, like the sound of an animal in the far distance, but it grew louder, closer, and more menacing with each passing second. My heart began to race, and I instinctively gripped the flashlight tighter, swinging it from side to side, searching for the source of the noise. I couldn't see anything. The growl continued, echoing off the canyon walls, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't the growl of a coyote or a wild cat. This was something deeper, something primal. I started to backtrack, but my feet felt heavier with each step. It was as though the ground itself was holding me in place, unwilling to let me go. That's when I saw it, a figure. It was barely a shadow at first, just a silhouette against the rocks, but as my flashlight swept across the area, it became more distinct. A tall, thin figure, standing motionless against the backdrop of the canyon. It was dark, almost blending in with the shadows, but its outline was unmistakable. I couldn't make out any features, just the sense of something watching me. I froze. I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed with fear. I wanted to run, to get back to the safety of my RV, but my legs wouldn't respond. The figure stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at me with eyes I couldn't see, but I could feel. I could feel the weight of its gaze, the pressure of its presence, and then it moved. It was slow at first, like it was studying me, and then it lunged. I don't know how it moved so quickly. One moment it was standing still, and the next it was rushing toward me, its form twisting unnaturally as it ran. I turned and bolted, my heart pounding in my chest, the sound of its footsteps behind me like thunder in my ears. I don't remember much after that, just running, stumbling over the rocks, hearing the growl getting louder, closer. The wind was howling now, tearing through the canyon as if the land itself was alive, angry. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. When I finally reached the RV, I slammed the door shut and locked it. My breath came in ragged gasps, my body trembling from the adrenaline. I could still hear the growling outside, but it was distant now, fading away into the night. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel the presence of that figure, the eyes that had followed me through the canyon. In the morning, I packed up and left. I didn't even bother to break camp. I just grabbed my things and drove, not stopping until I was miles away from the Navajo Nation. I never went back. Since that night, I haven't been able to shake the feeling that I encountered something ancient, something that had been waiting for me. The Navajo people have legends of skinwalkers, shapeshifters that can take on the form of animals or humans, and I wonder now if that's what I saw. But no matter how much I try to rationalize it, I can't explain the fear I felt, the presence that lingered in the air, or the growl that shook me to my core. I don't know what it was, but I do know this. There are places in this world that are not meant to be explored, and the Navajo Nation is one of them.